Welcome to Be Customer Led, where we'll explore how leading experts in customer and employee experience are navigating organizations through their own journey to be customer led, and the actions and behaviors employees and businesses exhibit to get there. And now your host, Marbu Brown.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another thought-provoking episode of Be Customer Led, where you can bet that you're going to get some practical content that you can put to use right away in your business to enhance the customer and employee experience journey. If you feel like Be Customer Led has been offline for a bit, you'd be right. That's because I had a family emergency that took me out of circulation for a bit, but I'm back now and look forward to picking up right where we left off. And boy, do we have a treat for you today. We have the head of data science and analytics from Atlassian as our guest today. That's Dr. Chitra Ranganathan, and she has an amazing background to draw from to share insights with us, including stints at Microsoft and Amazon. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Chitra, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Marbu. So happy to be here.
Yes, glad you could join us today. Now, instead of me telling listeners about your career journey, I'm going to let you kick us off by doing that. You're the head of data science and analytics at Atlassian, and that plays such a critical role. Data science and analytics plays such a critical role in helping leaders to move the needle for customer and employee experience. So it's definitely a relevant topic for the Be Customer-Led audience. Why don't you tell us about your journey and how you came to be in this role?
Absolutely. So I'm originally from India, from the south of India, and I went to the US for graduate school. I went to the Ohio State and I got my PhD in psychology with a focus and concentration on statistics. Now, right
Go
after
Buckeyes,
my PhD,
by the way.
Go Bucks, indeed.
Go Bucks.
Absolutely. And then when I finished, I was at this interesting point of whether I wanted to do something focused on, counseling and clinical psychology, or if I wanted to be a professor, or I wanted to go into the industry. At no point did it occur to me actually to go into the industry or do anything corporate. So I figured I should be in academia. And I was an independent sort of teaching assistant, independently leading and teaching courses during my time at Ohio State. And I loved that. So I went and I became an assistant professor of psychology at Framingham State University, which is about 20 miles west of Boston. I was there for about 2 years as an assistant professor, and I taught some undergraduate and graduate courses definitely in research methods, statistics, and then a variety of courses. And then just life sort of led me to Seattle and to Microsoft completely by accident. I think my spouse said that, "Oh, your skill set is transferable." I refused to believe him, but somehow I did end up with a job at Microsoft. And for me, it was like, I don't know, I just felt like I just got really lucky, and I knew nothing about being in a corporate setting. All I had was just the research and statistics skills. So the ability to be a data scientist, but the domain was completely new to me. So I started with market research at Microsoft. And from then on, my career has been one where I've sort of expanded my breadth rather than my depth. And that's actually also jives with my personality. I'm more of like, I get bored. I want to learn something new type of person. So at Microsoft, I was there for about 6+ years, I think. And from market research, I went into sort of customer intelligence research, design and product research. I was a heavily quant person coming from an R1 institution at Ohio State. And then I learned how to do like ethnographies and focus groups and in-depth interviews with Microsoft's Office customers when I was in that division during my 6+ year tenure. And then from then I switched to Amazon, and the Amazon role was about employee experience. So as you can see, I kind of went through the breadth of like different kinds of research, different topic areas. So the job posting was very appealing to me, but at that time I actually had like a newborn, like an infant, and everybody was like, "You must be crazy to think that you want to go to Amazon and its space when you have such a little baby." But then I absolutely loved it. I spent almost 9 years at Amazon, and I started out in like what I consider like a little startup within Amazon in the employee experience side of the things. And then I kind of expanded and did a few other things during my time at Amazon. I took a little break. I was quite burned out. And then I came to Atlassian. And the move to Atlassian also coincided for me with my family's move to India. So we now live in Bangalore after spending 24 years personally for me in the United States. So yeah, that's kind of how I came to be. And Atlassian is yet another new area for me, which is the B2B, sort of like we want to understand what Atlassian's customers like and dislike about the product, where do they experience friction. So yet another new area for me. So I was really excited to have an opportunity to kind of lead data science and analytics in this space. So that's kind of my brief history.
Well, hey, listen, that's an intriguing history. Now, tell me, you did work on ad partner satisfaction and studying ad partners when you were at Microsoft as well, didn't you?
That is correct. Yes. So that was like a market research lens and kind of understanding how satisfied, I guess, yeah, you're right, that they were with our advertising products back then. And this was like really before like they expanded and invested in Bing quite a bit, which is Microsoft's search engine, and all of the ad related growth that it actually did experience, even though as a distant second to Google, of course, but it still had its own market share. So yeah, actually, you're right. That was a focus on business as well. But this one, I guess looking at it from a customer friction point of view with the product, I hadn't had that experience. And so this is a new domain for me that way.
Cool. So that's quite a background and a lot to draw from. So along your journey, you've had all these different roles, and you've had roles that influenced the customer experience as well as the employee experience. And I'm wondering, is there a favorite insight from either one that you think was particularly impactful that you'd like to share with the listeners? And I'll tell you what, if you got a favorite one from each side, feel free to tell us about them both, right? But go ahead. Let me let you go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. So, yes, I've been lucky enough, I think, in some shape or form. And if I consider employees as internal customers for a company, then at this point, my entire corporate career across these three companies have had something to do with customer experience and whether customers are happy, right? So if you ask me for an insight, I think my insight is that during my time at Amazon with employee experience research, I found that to be a little bit of like a microcosm compared to like democracy. And allow me to make that connection, at least in the way I saw it, right?
Okay.
So we always want to know, kind of like, even as citizens and, people that live in certain parts of the world, we are always interested to know, hey, what is like the government doing for us? What are the things that actually are helpful and are not helpful? Can you be a bit more transparent about where all our tax dollars and tax rupees, in my case right now, where are they going, right? Like, how are you spending it? And so we want to trust governments when governments can be a little bit more accountable and a little bit more transparent. Again, I get that 100% transparency may not be in everyone's interest many times, especially when it comes to things like security. But for other things related to like policies and how are you using our tax dollars and what kind of improvements you're making, I found this employee experience work we did at Amazon to be kind of a microcosm of that, which is to say that what are we doing for employees that allows them to stay with the company, allows them to flourish and grow and thrive in the company. And our collecting feedback from them was a way of saying, tell us how you're doing and how we can help. But on the other hand, I think we also needed to go back to them and prove and earn their trust and say, hey, we are taking your feedback and driving some actions. So here's some transparency around that so that it motivates them to continue to respond. Because the intent behind that program was to understand employee experience and employee barriers. So it was really a great intent to start with. So that I think is my biggest insight. So I feel like everybody, whether you're a customer, like today for Atlassian or any other company, you still want to know that the company that you're using a company's product, and you want to know that they care about you and your input and your experience with the product. It's the same way, I think, like with employee experience as well, when I consider them as internal customers.
Cool. That's very interesting. Now, as I understand it, Amazon has this program called Amazon Connections, and it's kind of unique in the way that it's set up compared to other employee feedback programs and mechanisms and whatnot. Why don't you share with us a little bit about what makes it unique in its approach to capturing that feedback, like you were saying? It's a microcosm. What makes it unique in the way they approach that?
Yeah. So like a sort of a really quick history on that is that I think this was Jeff Bezos' sort of brainchild. And just the fact that he's a visionary and can really have this great foresight. So I think before Amazon operations exploded, right, in size, like it was just insane kind of an exponential growth that Amazon experienced. Right before that, I think Jeff Bezos was foresightful enough to understand that this yearly annual employee experience survey, where I've heard that they used to make all the employees in our warehouses, in Amazon's warehouses, go and like during lunch break, go to the lunchroom and kind of take the survey and then come back. And by the time someone processes all this data, it's another 6 months before you generate an action plan. By that time, the insights that these employees have provided have become stale. So I think Jeff wanted a way to be able to have a daily conversation with the frontline employee. So his vision initially was for this to be the conversation with our warehouse, because I guess he could see that the operations business was going to explode. And explode it did, right? Because when I initially started, we were collecting about 200,000-ish responses every day. And by the time I left, it was about 2 million responses every day, right? So, yeah, exactly. And so Connections is different because of just what I said, which is that it was a way to collect daily sentiment. It was sort of a quick multiple choice question in the initial days, and it would cover the entire gamut of employee experience. So it could be about the physical environment that you're working in. It could be about availability of tools and resources in your workstation. It could be about your immediate supervisor. It could be about safety practices that are being followed near your workstation. So it could cover that entire gamut of what an operations employee could face. And this included, by the way, customer service. So employees that were providing Amazon customer service. So that's kind of how it started. And that's the really biggest way that it's unique, because I don't think any other company in the world, first of all, no other company in the world has the scale of Amazon. Whether I think even back then, to when I first started there, to even now, I don't think any other company has it. And they had this really audacious kind of an idea to just be like, hey, let's collect employee sentiment data every day. So it's a single question for the most part, right? Sometimes an occasional follow-up will pop up, but really doesn't take more than 5 seconds of an employee's time to respond to the question. And then we, in turn, were collecting the data in the back end and aggregating, looking at aggregate level insights, which then we used a variety of data science methods to mine for these insights, so to speak. And then we would make recommendations to our business leaders around possibly what things employees are expressing concerns around that we might want to change, whether that's through policy or simply just because we're making some changes in processes or programs and things like that. That I think is the biggest one.
You probably had some interesting challenges just processing 2 million data points a day. I mean, there's a whole issue of scale that a lot of companies couldn't even begin to deal with. But I guess that also gave you the ability to break things down in a bit more granular way and have results that would be statistically relevant, if you will, for different sub areas and everything like that. So that sounds like pretty daunting yet very rewarding type of operation that you all were carrying on. Now, as I understand it, people had to answer those questions before they could actually start their day, right? When they signed on to their computers, those questions popped up and they had to answer those questions before they even got started. Tell me a little bit about that.
That is correct. So one of the also cool things I remember when we started with this is that, again, I don't know how much people know, in the operations business at Amazon and warehouses, employees use a variety of devices to do their jobs. Some use like scanner devices, some that are, packing the customer orders use like a computer terminal. Some may use Kindles, right? And by the way, there are a small minority of roles that don't use any device. So there is a very small population that don't use a device. And in those cases, in our initial days, we actually couldn't reach them. That small population we couldn't reach. However, anyone else that was using any other device, so this was homegrown Amazon technology that allowed us to pipe the question no matter what device they logged into. But you're right, they were expected to, as they logged in with their badge, they would get this question, it would pop up. And it could be a source of annoyance and frustration to employees as well, which they have expressed. They'll be like, hey, I'm really trying to get my shift started and you kind of annoy me with these questions. But what I interestingly found during my time there was, if you go to buildings where the leadership makes it a point to indicate that they care about the sentiment that is being shared so that they could take actions, then that 5 seconds was not a nuisance for them. On the other hand, if they're in buildings where that was not necessarily the culture, then they were annoyed that they had to take these 5 seconds. Imagine it's one multiple choice question, right? Like you're not really even typing, you're just clicking an answer. So really not more than 5 seconds. But we did find that difference. We did find that when there's leadership cascading all the way from the site leadership, a culture of like, yes, I care about what you're saying, I'll do things, and they share it, during site level meetings or even team meetings at the frontline manager level, then the employees were more likely to be like, yeah, it's fine. They didn't complain. But we did see.
Well, without giving away anything that's truly proprietary, I mean, how did Connections help to move the needle for the employee experience? Were there some things that were done that really made a difference and employees said, yes, I'm glad that I answered those questions because it made a difference for me this way, right?
Absolutely. It did. There are many, many examples, but I can talk to you about a couple of ones, which I think, again, to your point, I don't even work at Amazon anymore. So definitely want to make sure that I'm sharing like good examples at a high level, right? So the first example I want to share is around, I think, new hire onboarding. So again, in our warehouses, right? So you can imagine that a lot of employees onboard at warehouses, depending on what kind of labor shortages those buildings have. And so what happens is they all go through like this really quick onboarding session. And obviously you can imagine, like, even for me, when I start in a new company, I have information overload, benefits and policies and whatnot. And they used to go through this really fast. And very often we found that they're being overloaded with information and not realizing which are the important policies they need to keep in mind. Did lead to, sometimes attrition, sometimes just business outcomes that, are not desirable. So the new hire, so we created a battery of new hire questions that would, no matter, so if you started on Monday and I started on Tuesday, you would get your first day question on Monday and I'd get the first day question on Tuesday. So it would still kind of be appropriately served to the employee, no matter what their first day was and which building. And it would go on for about a month. So we collected new hire onboarding for about a month as they try to learn the job, because that's when they're learning the job. They're going through some training, but then they also start actually performing like an associate after a few weeks. So we also wanted to understand, how is the training? What are barriers in the training? Do you feel confident that you can go out there and do this job the moment this training ends, right? So we were able to collect like really wonderful insights. And also on some level, we were able to test behavioral nudges, which would just remind them during the first 30 days. It would just remind them of like important policies so that they didn't forget from the information overload during their orientation, right? So we would also do that. And we found those nudges using causal inference. We were able to actually see that those nudges led to improvements in business outcomes such as retention. Again, without going into too much detail, right? So new hire question set, which was customized, and it also sometimes was customized by business. So, if you're in customer service versus if you're in warehouses versus if you're actually a driver, delivering packages for Amazon, which started expanding, right? When Amazon started delivering its own packages. So all of that, we had custom versions, and that was like a really big success and very insightful. And everybody appreciated the insights that came from it. So we were able to make changes to programs, policies, training, whatever, based on the insights that we got, right? Sometimes at a local site level, sometimes at a regional level, sometimes at the company level. That's one example. Another example that, again, we all went through a pandemic that was unprecedented in 2020. No one knew what was going on. I think unlike people like me who could just work from home during that pandemic, Amazon's warehouse employees went in to warehouses because they were fulfilling orders for customers that were maybe immunocompromised or people who could not go out and get anything for themselves. So they all had to be delivered things at home, right? So
they were essential workers too.
Exactly. Right. So they were exactly essential workers. And in that category, I know certainly in the US, right? So what we could do. So, we have a usual set of questions. It kind of some questions rotate every month, blah, 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 right? But when COVID hit, we were able to basically just hit pause on anything we were asking, completely pivot and make it questions about COVID related things that people, so we were asking them, so is social distancing being followed in your buildings? Like, do you get enough masks or PPE for you to go and do your job safely, right? So we were able to ask questions that were relevant to the pandemic that everyone in the world was going through. And where employees were kind of, putting themselves also at risk by going in to a warehouse instead of staying home, right, and doing these jobs. So those pulses, the fact that we could now start asking questions about that enabled our leadership to fly in supplies, right? So you can imagine by this time, by 2020, Amazon has a fleet of planes, right? So if we found, for example, that we got sentiment from buildings at an aggregate level that they did not have enough PPE, like masks and hand sanitizers and all of those things, then an Amazon plane would fly over to that location and then, make sure that they are replenished with all of this PPE supplies, right? So my point is that this program has such great potential to kind of really provide timely assistance or timely insights as the use case may be, so that we can ensure that business outcomes are positive.
Well, it's interesting because I was at Chase at the time. We had an employee feedback system that we used to process on a monthly basis, and we quickly pivoted that to be able to process that on a daily basis and actually help decision making for all kinds of practical things in the workspace. You all already had that up and running, and so your pivoting was more of pivoting the questions to match the scenarios and then use that. But I think this is incredibly valuable. And I think even as people are listening to us, they're probably thinking, if we wanted to listen to employees, almost real-time, near real-time fashion, right? Because you're doing this on a daily basis, processing, being able to capture the insights and make recommendations. I'm sure some people are thinking about that. So when you think about this compared to a traditional system, I think one of the things that we've already identified here is that speed is one of the things that it delivered. What about other types of things? Like, for example, did it uncover insights that were otherwise missed by traditional systems? Did it uncover different types of insights? Or tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I can think of two examples, right? One is safety. Again, when you're in the warehouse, I'm not talking about COVID safety right now. I'm talking about just regular, everyday safety when you're a warehouse employee and you're kind of walking around in a 1 million square foot facility, right? Which is what most of the warehouses in North America at this point are. And you're also dealing with all these machinery around you. And in some cases, these were robotics buildings. So your workplace safety and whether safety policies were being followed there becomes very critical. Now, if you do an annual employee survey or even a biannual employee survey, you're getting that sentiment at that frequency versus when you are able to pivot a system where you can collect sentiment on a daily basis. You can collect this data every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or whatever your desire might be. Now, if we are finding, for example, that let's say that a particular building needed to really amp up their workplace safety policies or their programs and ensure that employees felt like it was being followed, then we could ask the questions more frequently in those buildings, right? To ensure that those actions were being taken. Now, you would absolutely not have that kind of flexibility with any other kind of polling mechanism, which is, not like this, right? So I think that's one. Imagine safety, and I'm talking about human life in this case, right? To the extent from workplace injuries, which require first aid, all the way to the extent of saving human life here. So those are critical things that I think, we could really leverage such a mechanism for, which is a fantastic use case. I know I'm very proud of the work that we did in this space as well, because this was around leadership effectiveness or leadership development, right? So one should know that, at Amazon, sometimes your frontline level leaders come in with experience managing 60 to 80 associates under them. Sometimes they come in with zero experience, right, into that role. Now, one of the things that we wanted to understand through connections as well was we wanted to understand the managers and how people felt about their frontline leaders and whether they were getting the support that they needed. And what we could do with that also was if we found that there was an area of improvement, then we built a program which was an automated, customized leadership recommendation program where we would, if let's say, Marbu, you could improve in communication, then we would send you customized recommendations to you, the manager, about communication, about leadership, communication, and improving those skills. And if mine was around how I prioritize the team's time, then I was getting recommendations around that, right? So we were able to kind of test and build recommendations, first see which ones were effective in actually moving the needle on sentiment. And then we were able to crowdsource best practices from other managers. So if I told you, Marbu, your colleague, John Smith, said this is a best practice they follow, you're probably more likely to listen to it or read it than if I said research says you should do this. At least that's what we found. It's like when we said someone you know and someone like you is recommending this versus like research in the literature says this, right? So we were also able to use it for this use case, and we built a big program around it, which was really fantastic because we were again testing nudges at scale and kind of like figuring out which ones were statistically significant in improving a behavior and then building that into a program and a repository. So that was yet another use case, I think, that was unique that you don't get to do when you do like biannual or even quarterly kind of polling.
Before I said speed, but I think maybe a better word to use is timeliness. Because like those things you mentioned about safety, if you're doing annual or biannual, by the time you actually process that and get that information back to the field, if anything bad was going to happen, it already happened, right? Whereas this is happening in such a timely fashion that you're able to nip things in the bud, solve them. And even with managers, right? If there's something that's amiss from the perspective of a manager or an area that a manager could definitely improve, being able to get to it sooner rather than later is a big deal. So I think that timeliness factor is quite a huge one, part of what you've been discussing. So you've mentioned a lot about operations, but Amazon did expand this past the warehouses and, into corporate roles as well, right?
That is correct. They did expand it. They began that expansion, if I'm not wrong, in like 2017. It was done in a phased manner, but it started in 2017, the expansion to corporate.
Yep, which means I had a chance to participate in that too. And so, I got to participate in it from the user side of it. But I also saw some of the very benefits that you have been describing. It's so interesting because our time has gone very, very quickly. But I got a couple more questions related to this, and we'll switch gears. So if you were going to make some modifications to how that program was run to make it even more effective than it already was, what are the top one or two things that you would do? Because again, I imagine as some people listening to this, they're trying to think, how could I put something like this in place for my team or my teams?
Yeah, I have like two recommendations, and they're both centered really around employee trust, because that's often what we run up against is like employee lack of trust or cynicism about it or whatever. So in my opinion, so this is purely my opinion, of course, but in my opinion, we should do two things in such situation. Number one, I think if Jeff Bezos had mentioned in I'm just going to use his name right now, but if a senior leader, an executive in any company mentions at their company meeting that, hey, we have this mechanism, and the reason we have this mechanism is because we want to understand your feedback, and the reason we want to do that is because we want to take actions that will improve your employee experience. So I highly encourage all of you to do it. And then their leadership team kind of follows suit and make sure that they advocate for employees to take it. Now, initially, that doesn't mean that every single one of them are going to take, are not going to be cynical anymore. But whoever does take it, if we can then demonstrate some examples of actions taken and then communicate that back to the employee. So if we can use the same exact UI where we are sending the question, instead, once a month, say, because of your responses from your whole team, your whole org, here's an example of something that we changed, right? Like that would truly make this, I think,
a lot more powerful.
Groundbreaking. Groundbreaking actually, right? Yeah. Because at that point, you're now really invested in employee satisfaction and you're doing everything you can to become employee centered, right? Which, by the way, is one of Amazon's leadership principles right now. Earth's most employee-centric company is one of their newest leadership principles. So that's one. And then second, I would say is in addition to kind of telling the employee here is an example of something we've done, also provide some employee level reporting. I think we provided a lot of insights to managers with reporting. So if you were a manager, we'd be like, here's your score, here's your blah, blah. But I think employee level reporting would also be part of, so they both go under trust, in my opinion. But I think some level of, me as Chitra being able to see maybe the history of how my scores are varied and based, depending on various categories of questions or whatever, that also might provide me the view that, okay, my company cares enough to show me my own individual sort of history with this. Like maybe I can play around with some views that also might engender some trust. So these are just my opinion.
Cool. Well, let me switch gears because we talked quite a bit about connections. In your current role at Atlassian, how are you using data science and analytics to advance the customer experience or the employee experience or both?
Yeah, absolutely. So at a high level, sort of my team, we are in an enablement organization. We are in a service enablement organization. And the charter of my team is to ensure that we use data science, AI, and analytics to quickly process data about customer friction with Atlassian products, and then be able to stack rank it or prioritize it and size it so that our service enablement partners can take it to engineering and product and really ensure that those enhancements to the product happen, right? So at the end of the day, we still want to improve our customers' experience with our products. And so we look at how do we identify friction at scale and as quickly as possible. So we leverage analytics, we leverage data science methods, we also leverage AI LLMs quite significantly in that role.
Now tell me, I think that AI has made it possible to capture customer and employee sentiment in ways that were different before. I mean, a lot of times we always relied on, surveys and all of those kinds of things. But I think there's other ways that we can capture some of the information that we used to have to rely on surveys for. Can you tell me how AI has changed the way that you capture and measure customer and employee sentiment?
Yeah. So, AI is, I think, like a complete game changer. And I feel like, as much as like someone in like my role, I'm constantly trying to like keep up. And I feel like the growth in technology and the capabilities that AI can provide far exceeds the time and the capability I have to process. So I think it's a game changer that every one of us, by the way, whether we are in data roles or tech roles, like need to start understanding how we can best use and leverage AI. So I think that would be a mistake if we did not do it. Now, having said that, I think in my role and in our team's role, we are leveraging the LLMs, like large language models, very, very significantly to understand customer friction. Because when there is reported friction with our products, it's in the form of a support ticket that they have filed to our support team that then looks at that information or a complaint from the customer. Then they have to manually read it and triage it and kind of like really figure out, is this big enough for me to take it to engineering? Do I then just respond and be done with it? So there's so many of these things. AI now just enables us to process that information, large amounts of text data really quickly and be able to like thematize it, be able to like, size the extent of the friction. Right? Like go back and check like in history and come back with recommendations, even to the support engineer for how you could maybe more quickly solve this customer's issues. So AI is front and center in the organization that I belong to at Atlassian. And it's so fantastic to see all of its applications, which are really making the life of both our customers better, as well as our support engineers better, the people that provide support. So that's really a very exciting frontier for us that we continue to want to invest in that.
Well, that's great. I think about the fact that your team was processing like 2 million responses a day. Frankly, in all of that text, unstructured data that the company collects or companies collect on a daily basis, when you start talking about scale and data points, it would be something similar to that, except now with AI, things that were basically we couldn't even touch. We can do that now. And it seems like something pretty amazing. And it sounds like you all are using those other data sources besides surveys and stuff like that to process. So we've covered quite a bit of territory. Are there any parting thoughts or comments or anything like that you want to leave with listeners as you think about some of these things that you've touched on along your journey? Anything like that comes to mind that you want to share with folks?
Yeah, I think like it goes back to kind of the nature of this podcast, right? Which is that customer obsession and customer centricity. I think that those can also just be like AI can be buzzwords you can throw around, but they're harder to sort of like really sit and strategize and execute because they don't always pay off in the short term. They pay off in the long term. And very often companies don't want to think about it long term, right? So I would say that, like, to me, that's always the thing that I try to remind myself is some of these initiatives we have towards customer centricity. Now, those are not going to pay off right away. You're not going to see results right away, but it is going to pay off in the long term. And so you need to persist and be consistent with those principles and how you build your products, or in a situation like Amazon, sort of consistently measure that sentiment and keep reassuring employees that actions are being taken, right? So that needs to keep happening. And Amazon's history, by the way, in the past also indicates that they didn't look at short-term gains, they waited for long-term gains, and now look where the company is, right? So I think that's what we have to keep in mind. That's probably my parting thought, and something that I remind myself constantly when I get a bit frustrated. So I think that would be my parting thought.
Cool. So what question would you like to see me ask my next guest? Is there something that, after we've talked about all this stuff, is there something you'd like to see me ask my next guest?
Yeah, like what I just said, if you can ask your next guest how they demonstrate customer centricity or obsession in their roles or in their company, I think that can be a conversation with every new guest of yours that we can ask and answer and keep learning, getting insights from it.
Well, Chitra, it's been a pleasure talking to you and getting all of these different insights. And I definitely think that the content that you shared is usable right away. I think that you've probably stimulated people's thinking about some ways that they can dive into the employee experience, move the needle on the employee experience, do the same thing on the customer side. I think there's a lot of things that you shared. So I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. If people want to continue this conversation with you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
You can definitely find me on LinkedIn, just Chitra Ranganathan, and you should be able to find me. And so please definitely email me or message me, and I would be happy to continue the conversation with you.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you spending this time with us. And with that, we will sign off for today's episode of Be Customer Led, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with our audience very soon with another episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Marbu. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Be Customer Led with Marbu Brown. We are grateful to our audience for the gift of their time. Be sure to visit us at becustomerled.com for more episodes. Leave us feedback on how we're doing or tell us what you want to hear more about. Until next time, we're out.